welcome to Hood Theological Seminary for the annual Bishop Speaks lectures. Bishop Speaks was a pioneering Episcopal leader in the A.M.E. Zion Church. Spent a number of years in Durham at St. Mark A.M.E. Zion Church, but also was involved with Hood Theological Seminary on the faculty. So we are honored to have these lectures that bear his name. Our speaker tonight, we have two, Bishop Gregory Vaughn Palmer and Darryl Brewster Starnes Sr. I'd like to tell you a little bit about both of them. Bishop Gregory Vaughn Palmer, who served as an Episcopal leader of the Ohio West area of the United Methodist Church. When he retired last year, he was the longest serving active bishop in the United Methodist Church. Born in Philadelphia, Bishop Palmer is a child of the church, the son of the Reverend Herbert E. and Mrs. Charlotte Sue Hewitt Palmer. Bishop Palmer received his undergraduate degree from George Washington University in Washington, D.C., and a Master of Divinity from Duke University Divinity School, where he and I crossed paths. And there he tutored me even as a student. We hung around together and broke bread together and were in a few classes together. Bishop Palmer was elected to the episcopacy of the North Central Jurisdiction Conference in 2000, and he also served as president of the General Board of Higher Education and Ministry from 2004 to 2008, president of the Council of Bishops in April of 2008 to 2010. Bishop Palmer is an enormously great preacher, and he and I go way back in terms of staying in touch and keeping each other encouraged. Bishop Darryl Brewster Starnes was born in Hampton, Virginia, but he was nurtured in the First A.M.E. Zion Church in Knoxville, Tennessee, where his grandfather was an organizing pastor. Bishop Starnes gave his life to Christ as a teenager and entered the ministry at 17 years of age. He holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in history from Livingstone College, a Master of Divinity degree from Hood Theological Seminary, and a Doctor of Ministry degree in concentration of evangelism from the Beeson Divinity School in Birmingham, Alabama. He has pastored in about 8 churches in 5 states, and he served for many years as director of evangelism, and he did that for about 12 years until his election to the episcopacy in 2008. So as you can see, our speakers have a lot in common, not only being children of the parsonage, but their passion for preaching, evangelism, and leadership. So with that said, please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker for this lecture, Bishop Gregory Vaughn Palmer.
Thank you, President Lattimore, and for the privilege of being here and for the gift of our friendship across time. I'll never be able to be grateful enough, but thank you for having me here and for the opportunities you've given me across the years, some of which we were just laughing about at the beginning of my time prior to starting the program this evening. To Dean Eppenheimer, to all of the faculty, staff, and students of Hood Theological Seminary, thank you. To Bishop Starnes, thank you for waving me into the territory, Bishop Starnes, and letting the State Patrol know it was all right to let me in. So I'm grateful for the opportunity and look forward to your response. May I say to you that now that I have assumed residence in the state of North Carolina after many, many years, I look forward only to my continued and deepening association with Hood Theological Seminary. Let me suggest how I'd like to use my time tonight that you've so generously given me, and on tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. And I recognize others will view this as a recording, so don't get hung up in a time warp over what I'm saying right now. But tonight, in response to the specificity of the invitation, which was to recount and offer some reflections about the work of the most recent General Conference of the United Methodist Church, which happened back in late April, early May, down the road in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I'm going to spend some time rehearsing that tonight. It may feel a little boring, and I hope not, but thank you for being engaged. And I feel a little bit like I'm doing some ecclesiastical navel gazing. On the other hand, that which is not reflected upon is certainly not worth doing again or doing more of. So the invitation is warmly received to think back what were the pivotal decisions and to reflect on them modestly. And then tomorrow morning, after consultation with the president, I'm going to take up the matter of the future of the UMC, of Methodism, and of denominations in particular. So you'll probably get more of my opinions than you want, but it'll be a chance for me to kind of gaze out in light of some of the things that are said tonight, but things that you may already know, and to say, here's how I see the future, or both the perils and the possibilities. So a word about the most recent General Conference, which we kept referring to in this crazy technicality, which was necessary, that in April and May of 2024, 800 plus delegates, even though not all of them were able to make it, gathered in Charlotte, North Carolina, for the purpose of being the delegates to the General Conference and all that surrounds that. And we, of necessity, referred to it as the 2020 General Conference, because you might be aware that in 2020, there was some other drama going on in the world called a pandemic, the COVID-19. And so our General Conference, scheduled for 2020, originally in Minneapolis, subsequently ending up in Charlotte, was delayed or postponed, shall we say, by the Commission on the General Conference multiple times. So that's by way of background. I understand that the new discipline that may come out will come out as the product of the work of this most General Conference, in order to sort of track history, may have on its cover 2020/2024 General Conference, just to make note that of what we were doing, but when we actually had it. So it was against that backdrop that we gathered, but some other things were on the canvas as we gathered in Charlotte in the spring of 2024. I want to go back to 1972, when the United Methodist Church was very young. And you may recall that in 1968, there was the creation of a new denomination called the United Methodist Church. And it was referred to not as a merger, but as a union or a uniting. And that terminology is important because in mergers, sometimes not all of the parties see themselves as being on a level playing field. And so the Evangelical United Brethren Church and the Methodist Church came together in 1968 to form the United Methodist Church. And then there were a series of gatherings around structure and realignment or alignment of resources, locating of offices, et cetera, that happened over a period of time. But we came together as the first General Conference post-68 of the United Methodist Church. Now, I was not there in one sense, but I was there as a youth observer participant in the General Conference, which was held in Atlanta, Georgia. Among the things that the 72 General Conference had been assigned to do was to work on the church's social teaching, or the social principles. You'll hear a little bit more about that. And the social principles of our tradition are primarily a teaching resource that frame, in the language of the time, the church's best thinking about how people shaped in the life of Jesus Christ as Christian community respond to the realities of the world. So they attempt to address everything from the economic community to what is referred to as the natural community, and they get into things, the nurturing community, things like marriage and family and sexuality. It addresses, what do Christians believe through the United Methodist lens? That would be about war, about alcohol, about tobacco. So it covers a wide range of matters. And in fact, one of the things that you'll hear me say later is that we had a revision of our social principles. But in 1972, when the social principles of the new then UMC were adopted, and they were debated by the delegates as is only appropriate, it seemed that it was a hugely pivotal moment. So think about all that was going on in human, let me say, sociological experience in America and the world coming out of the mid to late 60s and into the early 70s. And inserted into the social principles on the matter of marriage and sexuality in particular was this phrase addressing homosexuality. And the phrase said that we believe homosexuality to be incompatible with Christian teaching. And that phrase remained in our social teaching or social principles for a really long time, like until very recently. Now, I go back to 72, and then I'm going to leap forward to 2016. And what I want to say to you is that at every general conference after 1972, the social principles, or some parts of them, were in front of the delegates, because the delegates can amend, as you would imagine, any portion of the Book of Discipline. People send petitions in and are always working to get the language just right, whether or not it's about polity, or whether or not it's about doctrine, or whether or not it's about social teaching. And very little in our Book of Discipline is sacrosanct in the sense that it cannot or is intended not to be changed. Things, like historic Methodist doctrine or the historic teaching matters that come from the Evangelical United Brethren Church in the case of how we became the UMC in 1968. So at every general conference since then, the social principles, among other things, continued to be what I want to refer to as a hot button issue. And people were on either side of saying we need to remove that language about incompatibility with regard to homosexuality in particular, or we need to keep it. And in some cases across the years, people sought to strengthen it. Now, remember, I said that the social principles were primarily a teaching document, but they point in directions about which other parts of the discipline, which are rules or polity, may spring from that teaching instrument. So think from 1972, I was a senior in high school, 17 years old, and this language enters the discipline. There were some other things. There were protests about the Vietnam War, and it was a contentious time, as you either remember or have read, if you were not old enough to be engaged. So in 2016, so I'm leaping quite a ways now, when the United Methodist General Conference convened in Portland, Oregon, once again, among the hot button issues were the matters of what is the United Methodist Church's teaching on human sexuality. And we ended up staying in the same place, but in response of what we had seen at every general conference, which was contentious debate and physical demonstrations, sometimes for brief periods, needing to shut the floor of the general conference down and take a recess for cooler heads to prevail, some would say. We seem to be really reaching an impasse. And so a motion was made. The bishops took on some leadership that was certainly implicit and explicit in that. And out of that, made the decision to create what was called a Commission on the Way Forward. And again, this is a church trying to find its way on a highly sensitive issue. And of course, when we came to 2016, at least in the United States, the gate had been opened more in the arenas outside of the church because of the decisions around same-gender marriage in terms of the ruling of the Supreme Court. So the bishops then called a special session of the General Conference. So I'm moving 3 more years for St. Louis in February of 2019 for primarily the express purpose of receiving the report and the recommendations of the Commission on the Way Forward. And that report basically was a call to the church to, at a minimum, remove what some would call harmful language, pejorative language, negative language, etc., about people who were same-gender inclined, in same-gender relationships, and people who wanted to be in ministry with them in demonstrative ways, such as performing marriage ceremonies, etc., as was now legal in the United States. And it's key to keep that underscored. As it turned out, the commission's report was not what prevailed and was not adopted in the form that it went forward. And the church, in one sense, held the line, some voices would say, and another motion was passed that began to create a segue for congregations who disagreed with the church's standing or the contentiousness of conversations about human sexuality, and they wanted a pathway to exit the United Methodist Church. Now, again, I'm giving you a canvas against which the General Conference we just gathered in was painting on. And so that whole paragraph 2553, which again is insider kind of language, created a path for local congregations with a certain set of circumstances and criteria and requirements and then the vote of the annual conferences in which those churches were to be able to exit the denomination. And here's the key, because churches could always exit the denomination. There were pathways. In this case, what it did was created a pathway where if certain requirements were met, the trust clause could be released and churches could exit with their property. So a part of that canvas on which the General Conference was painting this time is we were a denomination while the same number of delegates, because they had been elected mostly in 2018 and 2019 coming to for the 2020 General Conference, was now getting pretty close to being 25% less. So we've lost at least 25% of our congregations. Where I was serving at the time in West Ohio, we lost about a third of the congregation. So in July of 2022, I was bishop of 961 congregations in Western and Central Ohio. When I left, it was 600. And almost all 300 of those that exited were due to disaffiliation. Some were closures, meaning their lifespan had just come to an end. So disaffiliation was a part of the canvas. And then finally this, we continued to paint on the canvas of what does it mean to be a global church, a church at work around the globe and in meaningful partnership, not hierarchical or patriarchal partnership with all of our communicants and constituents around the world. So when we gathered under the theme, and know that I am God, which you will recognize as grabbing a snippet from Psalm 46, the party was on in Charlotte. I understand that's not terribly academic and intellectual language, but it was real in terms of the feeling, just a kind of a sense of anticipation for some and a sense of dread for others. a kind of a sensing where would the delegates come out on any number of matters. And while human sexuality was not all that we did, it certainly was a headline issue. So I want to say a word about that. This General Conference that we just completed in early May did act in effect to remove the restrictive language related to gay and lesbian persons in the United Methodist Church. Some people would say LGBTQ people. I'm emphasizing gay and lesbian persons because there has never in the Book of Discipline been specific language about transgender people, about bisexual people, et cetera. But as you would understand, many people that look at themselves through the lens of LGBTQ, and some would say plus, see a sense of camaraderie or likeness in terms of their experiences in the church and in the world. And so the delegates voted by a significant majority, not even in question, to remove the language about the practice of homosexuality being incompatible with Christian teaching. That one motion had been in front of the General Conference so many times and in so many forms. Remove the ban on the ordination and appointment of self-avowed practicing homosexual clergy. Now, that also assumes that everything else is in order, and what it in effect says that one's gayness or being lesbian should not be a barrier to entering the ministry if all other requirements of the conference boards of ordained ministry. It removed the language have been met, the delegates removed the language that made the ordination of self-avowed practicing homosexual clergy and the performance of same-sex weddings a chargeable offense. So a clergy person who performs such a wedding could no longer or can no longer be brought up on charges or have a formal complaint under the discipline filed against them. Remove the mandatory minimum penalties for clergy who held or hosted same-sex weddings. And the list goes on of delineating our actions in these matters. So that was obviously, let me use the word, a big rock, if you will, in terms of the actions of the General Conference, though I've spent considerable time ramping up to that, not the only thing that we did. What was amazing, so this is commentary to me, is the sense that that it wasn't just U.S. and may I say European delegates who were voting in ways that were dramatically different than delegates from the emerging world, so to speak, in terms of Africa and the Philippines. It's apparent to me that people across all sorts of demographics voted to remove this restrictive language in the Book of Discipline regarding our gay and lesbian sisters and brothers. The second thing that happened, which is not unrelated to it, but specific in its own right, is another large rock, and I mean that sincerely, is that the delegates passed a number of petitions related to regionalization of the United Methodist Church. And what regionalization is about is creating enough space in United Methodism from a polity and decision-making standpoint that the delegates to a general conference, which brings the world, quote unquote, together, where we have communicants and constituents, do not have to spend a lot of or an inordinate amount of time voting on things that are irrelevant to their region of the world. It is, and this is significant, a decentering of the United States as the center of the United Methodist Church, because there are many of the saints around the globe who often wrestled with and struggled, and some of us here in the United States wrestled with and struggled with the notion, are we truly a global church, or are we a U.S. church with a number of outposts outside of the United Methodist Church? Tremendous difference in how people relate to each other, how people see each other, who has power in rooms, whose voices matter, whose first language matters. Do you see the significance of that? So the amendments to the Constitution, which were voted up, they now have to be ratified over the next 12, maybe even 18 months in the several annual conferences around the globe. Are a movement toward decentering or decentralizing any one part of the world and making the global gathering that is called the General Conference about things that everybody has to pay attention to and everybody needs to adhere to. And that hasn't always been the way that it is. We have cared for things that all United Methodists should pay attention to, and we have often short shrifted because of the complexity of complete understanding of what really needs to be managed and finessed and understood in geographic, in language, in national origin, in religious or not religious context in the world. So regionalization, you pray for us as we live into all of these realities, and we'll let you know down the road if the constitutional amendments are approved. I will say there's lots of energy to get them approved by votes in the annual conferences, and there is a whole energy field against approving them, thinking that it is merely a ploy, if you will, a Trojan horse to move the church to more, let me use the word liberalism or progressivism. I do not happen to share that point of view, but I'm not blind or deaf to the reality that that perception is out there among some, and they are beating that drum to move in that way. I mentioned earlier the social principles adopted in 1972 as having been controversial across the years. 1972 was not the first time, for example, that Methodists had a set of social principles. Those go back to the very early part of the 20th century and then have been revised across the years. And the name, it started off as the Methodist Social Creed, and it's had a couple of iterations of titles or rubrics across the years. But over the last decade or more, there has been a whole revision process to all of the social principles, not just to the sections on human sexuality, marriage and family. Many things remained intact, but language was made clearer and more usable. And of course, the social principles, as we try to do with most of our denomination-wide documents, are translated into a number of the major languages that are used on a regular basis among United Methodists. But French and Portuguese would be two that quickly come to mind. Now, I talked a bit about the disaffiliation. I talked about numbers and percentages of churches that had left. And of course, I should have said, and I say now, the disaffiliation window, which is now closed, was something that was only applicable to U.S. congregations. Only applicable to U.S. congregations. There are parts of the United Methodist Church in the world that had or have interest in finding exit paths. And in fact, one of the things the General Conference did was made provision under the current book of polity that we had at that time for the United Methodist Church in Eurasia to be able to exit and become what is called an affiliated autonomous United Methodist Church seems to be where the trend line that they're on. And so they had voted in terms of their own self-determination that they wanted to do that. It became a matter for the Central Conference, which are the aggregation of annual conferences in various parts of the globe outside the U.S., and then to be approved by the delegates to the General Conference. So there's still a few more windows that it will need to go through in terms of the Central Conference work for Eurasia, the annual conferences in Eurasia, to separate from the United Methodist Church. Their rhetoric and intention seems every bit bent on keeping a relationship with the United Methodist Church. I want to say a couple of other things in terms of constitutional amendments. There is a constitutional amendment that was approved that is very strong language about the United Methodist Church's commitment to declaring the sin of racism and its effects on human community, and the commitment of the United Methodist Church to eradicate racism in our world. So not just in the United States. You know that one of the things that all institutions have wrestled with, but faith-based institutions have been a particular spotlight in the news, whether Catholic or some Protestant denomination or some independent tradition. We adopted an apology statement to victims and survivors of sexual misconduct. And for example, at my last annual conference in Ohio, I read that statement during a session of the annual conference and made some comments about the commitment of the church to the healing of people who have been victimized by people through the church, and whether or not it was sexual harassment of a pastor or church employee or volunteer who engaged in something words touching, relationship inappropriate with a parishioner, or whether or not it was, keep in mind, the scouting program scandal that for which millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of dollars will be paid in a settlement fund. It's all of that together. And on the ecumenical front, and I think I'm running out of time, on the ecumenical front, we approved a full communion agreement with the Episcopal Church. We've been in a bilateral dialogue with them for a number of years. And we have full communion relationships with other traditions, those in the Pan-Methodist family, with the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, with the Moravian Church, and we have been in what is called interim shared Eucharist with the Episcopal Church, and are moving toward, we believe, hope, and trust, full communion with them. The dialogue team is still working, but in both traditions, we're working on what would the mechanics and the vernacular of full communion look like. And for those of you not familiar with full communion agreements, to summarize, it is where one church body recognizes the fullness of church in another church body and agrees not just to be sort of nice to each other, but agrees that clergy could be shared, that the Lord's table could be shared, et cetera, et cetera. So the recognition of church, all that is church, the church, one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic. All right. So if you take those four monikers and criteria, it is for us to put on the lenses to any denomination or any denomination looking at another denomination. Do we see in them the signs or marks of true church, that they are one, holy, Catholic, and apostolic? And then what would that mean for us to work in a more intimate relationship where we could even imagine, a pastor who born, bred, reared, and ordained in one tradition, serving a congregation of another tradition where there's full communion. That's one of the possibilities that is open to us. We also voted to a budget and some other voting that reduced the number of bishops for the United Methodist Church. And I did say reduce, not increase, to 32 in the United States. There was a modest increase of the number of bishops for Africa. But overall, we are down globally in terms of the number of active bishops in the United Methodist Church. This is driven by a couple things. I really don't want to get into my thunder for tomorrow, but not the least of which is budget. And so we're moving in some new and fresh and uncharted directions, which I hope will lead to the dismantling of some other barriers that will actually help us, whether or not we lose more bishops or stay the same or have more in the years to come. So let me stop there. Those are some highlights, and then offer this sort of coda on the matter. In general, it is my observation that the United Methodist Church could, if it chooses, and more tomorrow, be at the threshold of the best opportunity it has had to be church and to proclaim the gospel that helps to form disciples after the life pattern of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. I'm doing some paraphrasing of our mission statement. We may be at our best place to do that. Now, that sounds counterintuitive because of these losses that we have had, numerical, financial, people sort of really turning their backs on each other and, almost, to pick up language we don't use, really shunning one another over very difficult matters. And as you know, one of the things over this whole matter of disaffiliation and human sexuality is that we've had some churches that have left to form a new denomination. Some left to go independent. Some left to go to other denominations, some in the larger Methodist pantheon, and but not in every case. And so people said, people have used the language that, we've experienced schism, we've split. Let me tell you, split would be easy. We are splintering in one sense of the word. So I'll come back to more of that tomorrow. But my coda is, could it be that we might be at the very doorway of our best opportunity in decades to actually be church in ways that are meaningful to people who do not yet see themselves as a part of church? Are you with me? So that could be my own wishful thinking. Don't try to talk me out of it. I'm a prisoner of hope. And at the end of the day, that's all we have. But I can say more about why I think that is the case. I would say, secondly, we are a church not only looking toward a vibrant future with dramatic changes, we're a church that's still in the process of healing. But I also believe, sort of in the spirit of Henry Nouwen, could it be that we've been called to be wounded healers in this age? So if you'll just hear that as a poetic metaphor from a brilliant Roman Catholic pastor, priest, theologian, etc., Henry Nouwen, you can take that as you wish. Could we become stronger in the broken places if we really are healed, but not just sort of bracketed or sort of forced back together in whatever our internal brokenness is? So anyway, there might be some questions. I know Bishop Starnes will give me his take on matters.
Thank you, Bishop Palmer, for your evocative comments and observations. At this time, I would like to introduce to you to the senior bishop of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church, a man who loves evangelism and, like Bishop Palmer, believes in being transformed by the renewal of your mind. So Bishop Starnes.
Thank you so very much, Dr. Lattimore, and thank you, Bishop Palmer, for that very thought-provoking and informative presentation and lecture. I want to thank you for many things, one of which is to give us this lecture from a historical point of view, going all the way back to 1968 and, of course, 1972, and the uniting of two or more entities into what became the United Methodist Church. And then to make clear to us those three factors, the polity of the church, the doctrine of the church, and what you call the social teaching or social principles of the church, because that really played a major role in this understanding of how things evolved. And I wanted to also thank you for the insider information you gave us regarding the key issues and the key issue among other issues in this process, because as your sister church, we're looking at what happened from the outside. And what you did today was you did a marvelous job of helping us to understand it better from the inside. I just want to see if I understand some of what I'm going to call, and I think you alluded to this phrase, the large rocks. And I think the largest of the rocks is the change in the social teaching and the social principles regarding gay and sexual practices and ordination of those who practice that lifestyle. And you helped us understand that from 1972, there's always been this tension and this deliberation. I think you said at every General Conference, and it just continued to escalate until finally in 2016, it seemed that an impasse was reached. And you gave us that historical understanding of how the church decided to appoint a committee that would bring back to the General Conference their recommendations concerning a way forward. And so it was clear from your presentation how this evolved. And of course, we've been praying for you, our sister church, but this helped us to understand how the process evolved. I think there were some other rocks that you identified, and I want to make sure I'm identifying them correctly. But one was regionalization as a global church, with the decentering of the United States and its, you could say, undue influence, I don't know, and how the church looked at that and made steps in that process of regionalization. A third large rock had to do with the process of language in the book of discipline as it relates to changing of polity and social teachings. And that is a process I think you said that you all are going through even as we speak. And then there was a fourth thing that you lifted up. I think I understood you to say that in addition to those things, the church was intentional about some constitutional amendments regarding racism. And a fifth thing was that the church was intentional about apologies to victims of sexual misconduct by the church, its leaders, or its ministers. And so you've given us a clear vision of, yes, the sexual the sexual misconduct, which as it was called in the previous disciplines, was a major issue, but there were many other issues that resulted from this reshaping of the church. And so I am very thrilled with how you closed out by saying that you believe the future is bright, the opportunity for the church to move toward its best is before you, and yet that you are in a healing process. And so your process causes us to continue to lift you up in our prayers, but also to learn from you as you have gone through this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bishop Starnes. At this time, if there are any, we're going to take a couple of questions from the audience. If you will put those questions in the chat, we'll see which of the bishops want to respond to your question. If you have a question, please post it in the chat. Okay, this first question: when churches were allowed to exit United Methodist with property, were the tenured pastors allowed to exit with their benefits and retirement pay intact from the United Methodist denomination? The spiritual, relational, and financial loss of those who do not accept the revision concern me. And this is from Reverend Carolyn Buford.
Thank you very much. Bishop Starnes, thank you for your response. And you picked up on what I was trying to share. And so we ought to find some way to partner together and maybe write an article or something. So anyway, thank you for your willingness to pay attention. The question from Ms. Buford is really excellent. So a church exiting under the disaffiliation provisions that were created in 2019 did not assume that the pastor was exiting. So there were many churches where the church and the pastor exited, but it did not assume that. I can think of 5 in the conference that I'm serving off the top of my head who the church exited and they stayed. And because they were in good standing in the United Methodist Church, it was our obligation to, if they were in good standing, to give them an appointment, and they did receive such an appointment. Second part of the question, that if a pastor exited under the matters related to disaffiliation, there was no guarantee that the church they exited with was going to have them to be their pastor. So there are some that exited in the expectation that the exiting church, that in some cases they had helped to lead out, was going to have them as their pastor. And they found themselves having turned their credentials in etc., they found themselves in a no person's land, so to speak. Their choice, not what the conference or the bishop or the denomination did to them. Regarding pension, anything that was in any pastor's pension account is theirs. It is theirs. Whether or not they were eligible to draw upon it has more to do with age, federal law that govern pension plans. But no money was taken from any clergy person because they exited. If they exited the United Methodist ministry, they could no longer pay in to the United Methodist pension plan, but their account at whatever point it froze upon their exit was theirs and is theirs going forward. I hope that covers enough of what Ms. Buford was trying to get at. Thank you.
This next question, well, I'll take a question. I can't read the full language of the, yeah, the one at top. If it's go up, I can. If otherwise, I'll go to the next one. This is from Judge Adele Riley. My question revolves around governance. For example, do exiting churches recognize the governance of the United Methodist bishops?
They do not once they exit, nor do they have to. That's what the disaffiliation is, a coming apart. Some people have used loosely the metaphor of like going through a divorce. I don't know how that holds up in every ear, but once a church exits, let me use the words in the first person, or the bishop of the area or the conference from which they were voted to leave at their request, no longer has authority over them once all the requirements were completed.
Next question. You said the language has been changed so that changes will not be brought against clergy who perform same-sex marriages. Under your new rules, would charges be brought against clergy who refuse to perform same-sex marriages?
Excellent question. I can't tell you how many times I've answered that question because it was all in the Commission on the Way Forward's report, which was not adopted. But nevertheless, let me come to Ms. Hoskins Satterfield's question. The answer is no, because in our book of discipline, like in most church polities, the discretion of who the clergy person performs the marriage service for is the discretion of the pastor. So even where they're in agreement on everything, a pastor in the United Methodist Church, it may be true in Zion, may be true in our other partners, can say, I'm not going to perform your service because I don't believe you're ready to take on the vows of marriage. A pastor doesn't have to baptize every baby that's brought forth if they say, or every individual that says, I'd like to be a candidate for baptism, and they don't want to go through the process, take any classes, and he or she can say, I'll baptize you when I believe you are ready to assume the vows of baptismal membership. So we've got a couple judicial council decisions that have already undergirded pastoral discretion and authority. Now, what I am not saying is I didn't say that it was politically easy to make those decisions either way in a local church. But the discretion of who to perform the marriage ceremony for is the discretion of the pastor, and it has always been.
Bishop Starnes, I'm going to ask you if you'll make some closing remarks from what you've heard, or maybe any application or implications for the A.M.E. Zion Church or the church at large.
Well, I'm so appreciative of Bishop Palmer, not just his content, but the tone in which he has shared and taught and lectured. Because when we talk about healing, if the Lord is to bring healing to a family, if the Lord is to bring healing to a church, as a congregation, or to a denomination, it has to start with leaders who are being healed. And so the tone in which Bishop Palmer gave this this lecture was one of someone whose heart is healed or in the healing process. And so I'm appreciative of the content and the tone. I would only say, as regards to the A.M.E Zion Church or the greater body of Christ, is that we will always have to struggle with the impact or influence of society on the church. And I think his opening statement, one of his opening statements, as he defined social teaching, was, and I wrote it down. I want to read what he said. Social teaching or social principles are about how we respond to the realities of the world as disciples of Christ. And so that is always the challenge for us as individual Christians, but also for us as a connectional church, to make sure that everything we do is in the context of who we are as disciples of Christ, and yet how we're responding to the realities of the world. And of course, my bias is that the Holy Scriptures are foundational for both of those. But yet, any entity that says it's the Church of Christ must grapple not just with the Scriptures, but with their application in the present age.
Thank you very much, Bishop Starnes. Friends, I look forward to being with whoever is online tomorrow or physically present to pick up on this. And I want to talk about the future of United Methodism, and of denominations. Among the things I want to get at are talking about some realities in terms of the evangelization task of the church. And I also will pick up on a couple of threads of my own deep interest about in Methodism in particular, what is the future of the episcopacy, i.e. what is the role and the future of who bishops are and how they are leading and how they're called to lead the church into a new future. So those are a few tidbits. I hope it's enough to get you back. If you can't come back, you can look at the recording somewhere on YouTube. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock. God bless you.